So let's go to Revelation chapter 13. We're beginning on the beast out of the sea. We're going to kind of begin to look at the Antichrist a little bit and his kingdom some. And I think it's interesting the way God did this. But here in Revelation chapter 13, we are again backing up to the kind of the midpoint of the tribulation period. We're looking at these last 3.5 years of the tribulation. During this time, as we looked at in chapter 8 and chapter 9, we have the 7 trumpets that are sounding over the course of these last 3.5 years. It is an escalation that is taking place, a continual escalation of God's wrath over these final 3.5 years, each trumpet beginning to increase more and more. But also during this period of time, what God does in chapters 11 through 14 is he kind of zeroes in not so much on the judgments, that the particular judgments that are going on, but he zeroes in on the personalities of the great tribulation period. And so here we are backing up in this portion to the time of the abomination of desolation at the midpoint, and we are going to begin moving forward from there. So in chapter 11, we saw the killing of the 2 witnesses who had prophesied for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. They aided with the rebuilding of the temple. So they are killed right around that time of the abomination of desolation. Chapter 12, we were introduced into the warfare that has been going on really since the fall. And we see kind of the climax of that warfare where at the midpoint of the tribulation, Satan and the angels, his fallen angels, are cast to the earth, and their forces are restricted now to the earth as opposed to the heavenly realm. And so now we come into chapter 13. At the end of chapter 12, we saw that the dragon, because he could not go after the woman, he tried to go after Israel at the midpoint of the tribulation, and because he was unsuccessful with that, because she was able to be hid for those 3.5 years, he then, instead of going after Israel, he is now going to go after the remnant of her seed. Revelation 12:17 says, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That remnant of her seed are the believers of the tribulation period. The seed itself is Jesus Christ. We saw that at the beginning of chapter 12. But the remnant are those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, what Revelation chapter 13 does is he hones in on the way that Satan is going to attempt to make war with these saints and how he is going to accomplish this plan. He is going to use the Antichrist, or as Paul refers to him, as the man of sin, and it is going to be within this global kingdom that he sets up over the course of the tribulation period. Now, let's go to... Actually, we won't do that. And this Antichrist, he has many names throughout the Scripture. Just to give you a few of them, he is called the prince that shall come in Daniel chapter 9. He's called the little horn in Daniel chapter number 7. He is called the willful king in Daniel chapter 11. He's the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24. He's the son of perdition and the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2. He's the Antichrist in 1 John chapter 2. He's the idle shepherd and the foolish shepherd of Zechariah chapter 11. He's the rider on the white horse in Revelation chapter 6. And that's just a few of his names. I think there's about 30 different names that are given to the Antichrist in the Scriptures. And so obviously we're not going to look at all of them. That was just naming a few. But in the book of Revelation, he is primarily known as the beast. It's a very interesting title that's given to him, the beast. Now, as we get ready to go into chapter 13 here, there's a parallel to this back in the book of Daniel in chapter 7. And you'll remember as we went through Daniel, we spent a pretty good amount of time on this. And we've hit this several times, so I don't want to keep hitting a dead horse on this. But in Daniel chapter 7, in the first 8 verses, Daniel is actually by the sea, and coming up out of the sea, he sees 4 great beasts that come up out of the sea. He sees a lion that has wings like an eagle. He sees a bear that has ribs in its mouth, and it is kind of lopsided. It's on two of its legs, and it's told to arise and to devour much flesh. He sees a leopard that has 4 wings and 4 heads, and then he sees this dreadful and terrible beast that comes out of the sea, and it has 10 horns. Now, back in Daniel, we discussed that this sea that Daniel sees, well, I didn't mean that, but what he saw there, the sea is representative of the nations of the earth. In Isaiah chapter 17 and verse 12, God says, "Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the sea, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters." So the beasts that Daniel saw come up out of the sea, and it's representative that these are kingdoms that come up out of the Gentile nations. The lion is Babylon, the bear is Medo-Persia, the leopard Greece, and the great beast is the Roman Empire, primarily focusing in on the second part, the revived Roman Empire that we see here in Revelation chapter 13. So the first thing that we want to notice here about the Antichrist, and this is really all the farther I think we're going to go tonight, is just the first couple of verses. Notice here in verse number 1, it is now John, instead of Daniel, he is standing upon the sand of the sea and saw a great beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name, singular, of blasphemy. Now, this is really interesting. The word beast here is very descriptive. We saw the word beast come up in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. We have the 4 beasts that are around the throne of God. But the word beast that's used in chapter 4 and 5 in the Greek is zoon, which is where we get our English word zoo from. And it simply just refers to animals or living creatures. But the word that's used here for beast is therion in the Greek, and it refers to a ferocious or a wild animal. This is something that is on the hunt. This is something that is very frightening to look at and to behold. This is what John sees coming up out of the sea, as a ferocious, wild animal, something that is very frightening to behold. And again, coming up out of the sea, this is symbolic of the fact that when Antichrist and his kingdom arise, it is going to be a kingdom that comes from among the Gentile nations. In Revelation chapter 17 and verse 15, the angel tells John, "The waters which thou sawest are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." So when the Antichrist rises with his kingdom, it is going to be from among the Gentile nations, not from Israel. And this is pretty interesting because you tend to think of the Antichrist, if he's going to be a false Christ or an imitation of Christ, that he would have to be Jewish. I don't think he has to be Jewish, but I do think he will be of the line of Abraham. But he's going to be from the opposite side. He's going to be probably an Ishmaelite or even possibly an Edomite coming from the line of Jacob there. But in Daniel, we are told in Daniel 9:26, in describing the 70 weeks, Daniel tells us that after the 69 weeks, Messiah is going to be cut off. That's referring to the death of Jesus. And then after that, there is going to be the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire. And he says, "The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood." And what he's describing there is the people that came in and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD were in fact the Romans, and they are the people of the prince that is going to come later on. And so what we see there is that the Antichrist, is going to arise from within the Roman Empire. And I think that's really important to understand. But something to consider, though, when we often think of the Roman Empire, we often think of the western portion of the Roman Empire. We often think of Europe, northern Africa, but the Roman Empire had an eastern side to it as well. And the Roman Empire conquered the Assyrian Empire and extended almost over to India. They went into Iran. And so Isaiah refers to the Antichrist as being the Assyrian. And so he's probably going to be from that eastern portion of the Roman Empire, probably of the line of Abraham somewhere. Can't nail all that down specifically, but that's more than likely. As you put the pieces together, that's kind of what it looks like. And this beast that John sees come up out of the sea, it has 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns upon those horns. Now, in Revelation 17:9, we've discussed this numerous times. The heads are mountains, is what it describes it as. And these are not one city. They are 7 kingdoms. These heads are these 7 mountains. We've discussed this. It's Babel, Egypt, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome being the 6th in John's time, and then the 7th being the revived Roman Empire under the Antichrist. And his kingdom essentially is going to be a conglomeration of everything that has gone before, of all those previous kingdoms. And it is going to be a fulfillment and a continuation of what those kingdoms set out to do. And that was to destroy God's people and to rule the world. That is exactly what Antichrist is going to do. That's what all the kingdoms previous have tried to do. They were attempting to be world kingdoms. These 10 horns with the 10 crowns, they are, according to Revelation 17, 10 kings that during the first 3.5 years are going to receive power with the beast for a short time. And so this is the kingdom that he's going to have. And upon each of the heads, it says, are the names of blasphemy. Now, I struggled exactly what this was, and you study it and come to your own conclusion. But the names of blasphemy, if you consider the fact that each of the 7 heads are those 7 mountains or 7 kingdoms, we can see in the Scripture the blasphemy that is associated with each of those kingdoms very clearly. If you think of the first one being Babel, what took place in Babel, there was a tower that was built reaching up to heaven, and what was the point of that? It was false worship and possibly even an attempt to dethrone God. In Egypt, you remember Pharaoh, when Moses comes to Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord, let my people go. And what is Pharaoh's response? Who is the Lord that I should fear him? We think of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. Remember when he cast the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace? He said, who is that God that can deliver you from my hand? In Medo-Persia, Darius demanded worship of himself. In Greece, you had Antiochus Epiphanes, an epiphany being a manifestation of deity, and that's what he considered himself to be, is the manifestation of God. In Rome, they were polytheists, and the Caesars believed that they were God. So this is the blasphemy. Each kingdom had blasphemy associated with it, and his kingdom, the kingdom of the Antichrist, is going to be the fullest expression of everything that is blasphemous. Verse number 2 describes the kingdom of the beast. It gives us a little bit more detail as to what it's going to be like. It says, verse number 2, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. Now that's really interesting, because when you consider what Daniel saw, in reverse order he saw the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And so Daniel's looking forward in history. John at this point is looking back in time. And so we see it reversed. But these 3 beasts, the leopard being Greece, shows the swiftness. That's what characterized Alexander the Great's kingdom, is how fast he was able to, in just a very short amount of time, conquer the known world. The bear, Medo-Persia, the bear was told to arise and to devour much flesh. It was the largest of the kingdoms, and so it depicts the vastness of the kingdom of Antichrist. And the lion, Babylon, depicts the superiority. It depicts the haughtiness of the kingdom. And so with the leopard, the bear, and the lion, we see that it's going to be a very fast rising kingdom. Within 3.5 years, he's going to dominate the entire world. It's going to be very vast because it is going to be global, and it's going to be very haughty. He's going to be full of pride, obviously. He is the embodiment of Satan himself. And if you look down to verse number 5 there of Revelation 13, it says, there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And then in verse number 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. So he's very haughty. He's very arrogant. He obviously has not learned over the last 6,000 years and is still attempting to be like the Most High. But not only is his kingdom going to be fast-growing, global, and prideful, but notice what takes place here in verse number 2. It says, the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Where does he get the power to do this? He gets this power in Revelation 13:2. He gets it from Satan himself. Now, how does Satan do this? You remember back in Luke chapter number 4 when Jesus was in the wilderness being tempted. Satan comes to Jesus, and he takes him up into a great high mountain. He shows him all the kingdoms of the world. And he says in Luke chapter 4, verse 6, the devil said unto him, all this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. See, what took place at the fall, man was supposed to have dominion over the creation. But through his fall, man gave up the title deed, so to speak, to the earth. That's what the tribulation period is about. That's what the seven-sealed scroll is about, is that title deed to the earth. But right now, the whole world lieth in wickedness, or in the lap of the wicked one. He is the prince of the power of the air. He is the God of this world. And so he has the authority of all the kingdoms of the world. And so he has the authority to give it to anybody he pleases. And when this man of sin arises, he is going to give the kingdoms of this world over to the Antichrist to be ruled. Now, up until just recently, some of this stuff really seemed sci-fi-ish, I guess you could say. You know, could there really be a global dictator, someone to come in and actually rule the world? Would the countries of the world give up all their liberties and their independence and all these things and just all join up together and give their power and authority to one man or one organization? You know, and up to that time, you knew that the Bible said that, but just it didn't really seem like a reality. But over the last year, we've really seen this beginning to take place. And everybody just kind of rolls over and gives up their liberties. The governments of this world are coming together, and there's a lot more stuff going on behind the scenes that is not in mainstream media. But can such a kingdom really exist? Well, the scripture really seems to indicate that. You know, we've had several things leading up to this point over the last 2,000 years in particular. One, we understand that the world has been under the control of a false god. Satan is the god of this world, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 2 is very interesting because it refers to him as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. He's the god of this world. He's controlling the course of this world. And all Satan has to do is change the course of the world, and all the children of disobedience are going to fall right in line because he is working in them to follow him. Turn with me to 1 John. 1 John chapter 2. This is actually where we get the concept, or I guess the name Antichrist from. John's the only one that refers to him as the Antichrist. 1 John chapter 2, verse number 18, little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists. So he says, you've heard one Antichrist is going to come. He says, but right now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us, but they went out. that they might be made manifest they were not all of us. But ye have an unction from the Holy One, and ye know all things. I have not written unto you because ye know not the truth, but because ye know it, and that no lie is of the truth. Who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. Now what's interesting here is he says this Antichrist, these many Antichrists, they deny the Father and the Son. And this is certainly something that we've seen really in this country in the last 60 years or 70 years with this idea of evolution. What is that? That is a denial of the Father and the Son. We've had false doctrine, we've had false teaching, denying the person of Christ, denying even the existence of Christ and of God. You know, we're even at a point now in our country where people are denying the existence of Jesus at all. And it's the same people that would say that the Holocaust never took place either. But what is that? That is because of these antichrists that have been in the world. So we've had a false God, we've had false Christ working. If you go over to chapter number 4 of 1 John 4, Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God. For many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come. And even now already is it in the world. Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So there have been false spirits and false prophets. Now, this is really where we need to be careful, because while we understand that Antichrist is going to be in the future and that we're not going to be here if we're saved, we're not going to be here for that period of time, but John is warning us right now of these false spirits, that spirit of Antichrist that is presently in the world working, trying to deceive. You know, not everything that claims to be Christian is Christian. There's all sorts of different types of churches out there that claim to be Christian churches. I was watching a thing today, and it's, I think the name of the church is Grace Point Community Church. And in their worship time, when they do all their singing and have their worship team up at the front, not only were they dancing, it was pop music from my generation. So there was the Backstreet Boys and stuff. That's what they were singing in the church. So this is something that's going on in our day. That is not Christianity. That is a false spirit. That is the spirit of Antichrist. So the world is being programmed, and even within professing Christendom, they are being programmed for this period of time. There is the false gospel. Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He mentions the possibility of accepting a false Christ. Galatians chapter 1, another gospel. And we're familiar with the fact that the ecumenical movement, all these Christians trying to get together, let's just get rid of the differences. As long as we profess to know Jesus or to love Jesus, we can all get together. This is all moving toward the one world religion, one world government. We've also had false Christians that have come into the churches. Matthew chapter 13 warns us of that, the parable of the wheat and tares. That there are going to be those that come in deceitfully. They come in appearing to be Christians, but they are not Christians in actuality. They do not possess Jesus Christ. They are false. And I was explaining to somebody yesterday, you know, when you look at many of the denominations today, you have the Presbyterian Church USA denomination, the Methodist Church, denominations that are ordaining sodomite pastors. They are allowing sodomites to be members of the church. That are viewing it as an alternative lifestyle. Why does that happen? It is because you have unregenerate people making unregenerate decisions. You have tares among the wheat. And of course, we have had a false church, Roman Catholicism, and really false Christianity in general. But all of this is working in the world right now. It is what Paul refers to in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 as the mystery of iniquity. In that context, he's talking about how the man of sin, the Antichrist, is going to arise. He's going to be revealed. But before that time, Paul says, the mystery of iniquity is already working in this world. The world is being groomed and prepared for this period of time. And as believers, we need to make sure that we're not being deceived and catering to this mystery of iniquity, but we also need to make sure that we're working as hard as we possibly can to try to keep as many people, to rescue the people from this, to help spread the truth as apart from the deception. And with that, I think I'm going to